What if the very person who carried your reputation in the palm of their hand suddenly decided they had nothing left to lose? That chilling thought is not just the premise of a late-night drama script. It was the stark reality Meghan Markle confronted when her once-devoted confidant Jessica Mulroney allegedly threatened to draw back the curtain on the Duchess's carefully guarded past. This is more than a tale of friendship gone wrong. It is a saga of ambition, colliding with betrayal of survival in a world where image is everything. It is above all a reminder that the secrets you bury can one day topple the empire you spent years constructing. Before we press forward, take a moment, show your support, tap the like button, subscribe to this channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. And now, reflect for a second. In your own life, how many people truly know the raw, unfiltered version of you? The awkward mistakes you hope stay forgotten, the decisions you regret, the conversations you thought would remain private forever. Imagine if those people were not merely old companions from your past, but individuals who had witnessed your climb, who once applauded your rise, and who, with time, became dangerous liabilities the higher you ascended. What would you do then? Would you choose loyalty, or would you sever ties before they had the chance to dismantle everything you had built? This is precisely where Meghan Markle's story takes its sharpest and most uncomfortable turn. To the public eye, she is the radiant actress who captured a prince's heart and was ushered into the most famous family on earth. Yet behind the polished facade exists a labyrinth of relationships, unkept promises and deliberate betrayals that stand in stark contrast to the fairy tale narrative splashed across glossy magazines. And at the centre of this hidden history stood Jessica Mulroney, once closer than a sister, but later silenced, sidelined and ultimately erased. But why? What could possibly drive Meghan to risk incinerating one of her dearest friendships at the very moment she was cementing her place on the global stage? Why would a woman who spoke so often about loyalty suddenly abandon someone who had dressed her, supported her, and served as her anchor through the turbulent waves of fame, Tom Bower? The relentless biographer, notorious for shaking the royal establishment with his explosive exposés, offers an unsettling answer. According to his research, Jessica knew too much. She held the keys to Meghan's unvarnished Hollywood years, her restless ambition, and even her tangled romantic history before Prince Harry entered the picture. These were secrets that, if revealed, could shatter the image of the underdog princess and replace it with a portrait of a calculated climber, one willing to discard lovers, friends and allies the moment they cease to be useful. And it is precisely there, in that uncomfortable truth, where curiosity ignites, because Jessica was not the first. Before her, there were boyfriends who felt abandoned, colleagues who believed they'd been used, and family members who claimed Meghan traded blood ties for status. Was Jessica merely another chapter in a much longer story of strategic distancing? Or was she the one who came perilously close to pulling away the mask altogether? Those answers will come, but to understand them, we must first rewind. Picture Meghan Markle in the early years of the 2010s. Not yet a duchess, not yet a global household name, but a working actress, chasing roles, networking tirelessly at Hollywood gatherings, and leaning heavily on the doors opened by connections like Jessica. Meghan was not simply surviving in this demanding world. She was studying it, mastering it, shaping herself into someone who could dominate within it. She understood that appearances were currency. She recognised that friendships were rarely just emotional. They were strategic assets. And she knew, perhaps better than anyone, that no one stumbles into the summit of power by accident. That is where Jessica Mulroney entered the frame. She was not just another casual acquaintance. She was well connected, married into one of Canada's most influential families, and respected in her own right as a stylist and brand architect. She understood the mechanics of image. She understood the delicate science of optics. And when Meghan needed a trusted ally to elevate her profile, Jessica became indispensable, selecting the right outfits, arranging the pivotal introductions, and smoothing the path that transformed Meghan from a hopeful actress into an international name. But here lies the contradiction that makes this tale so gripping and so unforgettable. The very same woman who worked tirelessly to help Meghan shape a flawless, polished image for the world to admire, also carried the messy, unfiltered truth buried behind that image. Jessica Mulroney knew the contradictions. She had witnessed the raw ambition. She had listened to the private confessions late at night, the insecurities whispered in moments of doubt. For as long as their friendship lasted, those secrets remained safely hidden until the day they no longer were. And why does this matter so much now? Because the carefully constructed shell of Meghan's public persona is beginning to show visible cracks. The glossy narrative of resilience, victimhood, and triumph has been challenged not only by sensational tabloids, but also by insiders who, for the first time, are no longer afraid to speak. Tom Bower's book tore away one protective layer of that image, and the hushed accounts of Meghan's rupture, with Jessica add another fracture. Together, these forces compel us to question just how much of Meghan's life story is genuine and how much is a meticulously staged performance. This is not just shallow gossip whispered in dark corners. It is a lesson in power. It is a stark reminder that the higher an individual climbs, the more precarious and dangerous their closest relationships become. Bonds of friendship cease to revolve around affection and begin to pivot around leverage. Secrets evolve into currency, and with one wrong step, an empire can collapse into rubble. So, let us set the stage for what is to come. Meghan and Jessica, once inseparable, sharing long phone calls into the night laughter over shared plans, dreams of the future. Jessica was not only a stylist, but also a fixer, a confidant, the person who could solve problems while keeping appearances perfect. Meghan was the rising star, hungry for more, eager to transcend the limits of television fame. Outwardly, it all looked like genuine sisterhood. But beneath that glossy exterior lay a fragile balance, an equilibrium of loyalty set against leverage of friendship, undercut by the weight of secrets. Then arrived the turning point. That pivotal moment when Meghan realised Jessica was no longer merely her trusted ally, but her greatest liability. Jessica didn't only know the curated, charitable Duchess, she also knew the flawed Meghan, the ruthless Meghan, the fiercely ambitious Meghan. She knew of boyfriends discarded along the way, of painful family rifts, of stories that could never be reconciled with the shining royal fairy tale. And when Jessica found herself caught in the middle of her own scandal, a storm that ripped her reputation apart, Meghan saw the perfect chance to cut the cord. But here is the sting. Meghan did not sever the tie quietly or discreetly. She acted publicly, coldly, and with brutal precision. Jessica, blindsided, came to the painful realization of just how disposable she really was. This is where betrayal emerges in its sharpest form. Because Meghan's move was not simply about shielding herself from poor optics or negative press. According to insiders and Tom Bower's relentless research, she was acting to protect herself from potential exposure. Jessica's silence could no longer be assumed. And Meghan, ever the strategist, chose to let go before Jessica had the chance to pull the rope and unravel everything. So here is the cliffhanger we must leave hanging in the air. What did Jessica know that frightened Meghan so profoundly she was willing to erase her completely? What secrets, if spoken aloud, could destroy not just Meghan's friendships, but also her marriage, her royal standing, and the entirety of the brand she had so carefully and deliberately built? The answers are not just scandalous, they are deeply revealing. And in the next part, we will draw back the curtain on the glittering beginnings of Meghan and Jessica's friendship, how perfect it appeared at first glance, and why that perfection was destined to fracture from the very start. What exactly did Jessica know that alarmed Meghan so deeply she felt compelled to erase her from her inner circle? That is the question still dangling in the air. To uncover the truth, we must travel back not to the fallout, not to the scandals, but to the dazzling beginning. Because every act of betrayal begins with trust, and every fractured bond was once whole. But here is the twist. Even in those early days, the cracks were already there. Picture Meghan Markle in her early 30s. Not yet the Duchess of Sussex, not yet the international figure we know today, but a determined actress starring in the legal drama Suits, mingling with Canadian elites during her time filming in Toronto. On the surface, it appeared as if she had everything a steady role in a hit series. A magnetic charm that captured attention and ambition sharp enough to slice through steel. Yet Meghan craved more. She was not content with the comfortable glow of television fame. She longed for influence, for status, for a place at the table of cultural elites. Enter Jessica Mulroney. Jessica was far more than just another acquaintance Meghan stumbled across on her journey. She was deeply connected, married into the influential Mulroney dynasty. Her husband, Ben Mulroney, was the son of former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. The Mulroneys were not simply celebrities in Canada. They were the establishment, a family woven into the fabric of the nation's political and cultural identity. And Jessica herself was not merely a politician's daughter-in-law riding on her family name. She had carved out her own space as a respected stylist, working with high-profile clients, guiding brands in crafting their public image, and establishing herself as a trusted insider in the competitive world of fashion. So when the paths of Meghan and Jessica finally crossed, it was not just the meeting of two women, it was the alignment of two ambitions. Meghan discovered in Jessica not only a confidant she could confide in, but also a connector, a woman with influence who could open the right doors, refine her appearance, and elevate her from hard-working actress to cultural icon. But let us pause and ask a critical question. Was this friendship ever truly rooted in affection and authenticity, or was it transactional, from the very beginning, a partnership based on mutual gain? Because here is where the story becomes particularly intriguing. Meghan, by nearly every account, was magnetic, charming, quick-witted, and warm in her personal interactions. People naturally gravitated toward her. Jessica, on the other hand, was renowned for her charisma and her ability to make others feel as though they were part of something glamorous, something bigger than themselves. Together, they were electric. They attended exclusive events, travelled on enviable vacations, and filled social media with photographs that made outsiders long for inclusion. To the public eye, their bond seemed unshakable, a modern sisterhood forged in loyalty and shared dreams. And yet, beneath all that glitter and shine, something more complex was unfolding. Jessica was not simply helping Meghan select the perfect gown or choose the right shoes. She was actively helping shape Meghan's identity. Every carefully staged photograph, every meticulously styled public appearance, every strategic fashion choice, all of it became a brushstroke in the painting of the Meghan Markle brand. Meghan was no longer just a television actress. She was becoming something far larger, someone who could transcend the limits of the small screen. And Jessica was standing right there beside her, holding the brush and guiding the strokes. Now comes the contradiction. As Jessica polished Meghan's image to perfection, she was also gathering an intimate library of knowledge. Knowledge of Meghan's vulnerabilities, her hidden insecurities, her private strategies, and the relationships she desperately wanted to bury or rewrite. Think about it. When you are close to someone, you don't just witness their victories. You see the midnight doubts, the quiet tears, the frantic phone calls after auditions that end in rejection, the bitterness that festers when opportunities slip away. And in Meghan's case, you also saw the raw, relentless ambition, the drive that refused to accept anything less than centre stage. And Jessica saw it all. So, let me pose this question to you, the audience. If your closest friend knew every unguarded thought, every weakness, every ambition you had ever confessed, could you truly trust them forever? Or would there always be a flicker of fear that one day they might use that knowledge against you? For a time, however, none of that mattered. In those early years, Meghan and Jessica were an unstoppable duo. Jessica dressed Meghan for red carpet appearances. She positioned her strategically among influential figures, and she moulded the image of a woman who seemed destined for elite circles, not confined to the sound stages of Hollywood. And it worked flawlessly. By the time Meghan met Prince Harry, she was no longer just an actress from a cable television drama. She had been carefully sculpted into a woman who looked and carried herself as though she belonged on a royal stage. And who do you think quietly but significantly contributed to that transformation? Jessica Mulroney. It was no coincidence that when Meghan walked gracefully down the aisle at St. George's Chapel in the year 2018, it was Jessica's children who played an essential role in the bridal party. That moment was not just ceremonial. It was living proof of how deeply entwined their lives had become. Meghan was no longer just Jessica's friend. She had become family. But here is the bitter irony. The very closeness that once felt like an unshakable bond in the shared history, the late-night talks, the intimate knowledge, would eventually transform into the weapon Meghan feared the most. Because the nearer someone stands to you, the deeper their betrayal can cut. Now let us go further beneath the surface. As Meghan's star rose higher and brighter, Jessica remained faithfully by her side. Yet the power dynamic between them began to shift. Meghan was no longer the ambitious actress leaning on Jessica's network of contacts and connections. She had become a Duchess global royalty, a figure with influence that far exceeded anything Jessica could command. The balance tilted, the centre of gravity moved. Meghan became the sun, and Jessica found herself merely orbiting around her. It was then that the cracks, tiny and almost invisible at first, began to show. Reports suggest Meghan gradually stopped seeing Jessica as an equal and began to regard her more as a liability. Jessica, on the other hand, continued to bask in the glow of Meghan's royal success, enjoying the elevated status that came with being best friend to one of the most famous women alive. But the truth could not be ignored. Jessica still knew everything. She remembered the boyfriends Meghan desperately wanted forgotten. She held the private doubts Meghan wrestled with before marrying Prince Harry. She understood how meticulously curated Meghan's image was, and she also understood how fragile it could become if even a fraction of those hidden truths were ever exposed. And Meghan, of course, knew that Jessica knew. That unspoken reality hovered like smoke between them, simmering just beneath the polished surface. To the outside world, the friendship appeared unbreakable. Smiles in photographs, appearances at glamorous events of the perfect image of sisterhood. Yet behind the scenes, Meghan's calculations were already underway. She was watching, closely weighing her options, deciding when and how the inevitable severing should happen. And then the perfect storm arrived. Jessica's once bright reputation began to fracture. A public scandal erupted, reshaping her image from glamorous insider to a woman branded as out of touch, privileged, and entitled. Suddenly, she was no longer an asset, but a glaring liability. For Meghan, who had spent years carefully constructing her image as a modern, progressive, and compassionate figure, being tied to Jessica's scandal was nothing short of dangerous. It was the chance she had been waiting for the moment to make the cut. But here is the cliffhanger. When Meghan finally decided to end the friendship, it was not merely about protecting her brand from a bad association. According to Tom Bower's relentless investigation, it was about something far greater: survival. Meghan was not safeguarding her reputation from Jessica's fall from grace. She was shielding it from Jessica's knowledge, from the dangerous secrets Jessica could unleash. And in the next part, we will step into those shadows to uncover what those secrets really were and why they terrified Meghan enough to end one of the most powerful friendships in her life. What kind of truths could possibly be so explosive, so threatening, that Meghan Markle felt compelled to cut loose a woman who had once been like family? To answer this, we must go beyond the dazzling surface, past the royal weddings, the polished interviews, the carefully staged red carpets, and enter the private world Meghan guarded so fiercely. Because at its core, this story is not only about betrayal, it is about control, leverage, and the frightening power that comes with someone knowing too much. Picture this: a Toronto apartment late at night, lit softly by the warm glow of a lamp. Two women talking for hours, laughing over shared stories, confiding in each other with the intimacy of sisters. Jessica Mulroney, the trusted confidant, listening closely as Meghan spoke freely about her past, her ambitions, her deepest doubts, and her tangled relationships. These were not throwaway conversations. They were intimate revelations, the kind of truths you only share with someone you believe will guard them forever. But what happens when that trust no longer feels like safety, when the very act of sharing turns into a looming liability? Jessica knew the truths about Meghan's past relationships, the ones Meghan desperately wished to erase from public memory. Not merely the Hollywood boyfriends who came and went, but the deeper patterns of ambition choices that sometimes edged dangerously close to manipulation, calculated moves that, if ever exposed, could shatter the royal image so carefully built. Jessica was aware of the ways Meghan manoeuvred her way through the Hollywood maze, the strategies she employed, the moments where asserting control was the only way to survive. These were not trivial anecdotes. They were fragments of a puzzle which, once pieced together, could portray Meghan as something far removed from the compassionate modern royal adored by millions. Think about it for a moment. Every close friend holds the power to wound you, provided they possess the right knowledge. Each late-night confession, every unguarded admission, every raw and candid moment has the potential to turn into a weapon. For Meghan, Jessica's awareness was not just an echo of the past, it was a constant, silent threat. And as Meghan rose higher from actress to Duchess, that threat only grew louder, more dangerous. The stakes were not merely personal anymore, they became institutional. A single careless leak, a whisper to the wrong ear, or the faintest rumour could undo years of painstaking work, obliterating her public persona, her influence, and the fragile trust she had managed to cultivate with the royal family. Jessica, however, was not malicious, at least not in the beginning. She was human, with flaws, ambitions, and her own battles to fight. She was outspoken, she was confident, and she was building a career and social standing of her own. Yet in Meghan's calculating eyes, the sheer proximity of someone who carried such knowledge was enough to warrant decisive action. And so Meghan made a choice. It was not emotional. It was not impulsive. It was cold, calculated, and deliberate. She began creating distance. At first it was subtle, missed calls, vague responses, cancelled plans. A shift so quiet that outsiders might dismiss it as the natural drifting apart of two busy women. But it was not drifting. It was strategic isolation. Every skipped meeting, every event where Jessica's absence was noticeable, every public appearance without her sent a loud message the friendship was finished. And for Jessica, the realization must have been devastating. One moment, she was at Meghan's side for every red carpet, every milestone event, every private celebration. The next, she was on the outside looking in, a frozen spectator of the very life she had helped craft. This was not simply a public rejection. It was a warning, a clear signal that she was no longer safe, no longer protected, no longer untouchable. Now pause. And imagine, how would you feel if the person you trusted most suddenly decided that the knowledge you held about them was too dangerous to allow? You would feel betrayed, blindsided, enraged, and fearful all at once. That was the unenviable position Jessica found herself in. She lacked proof, lacked leverage strong enough to push back against Meghan, yet she still possessed secrets that had the potential to dismantle everything Meghan had so meticulously built. It was a fragile, perilous balance of power, and Meghan was determined to move first. Tom Bower's relentless investigation shines a light on this dynamic. His findings suggest Meghan's fear was not the product of paranoia. Jessica truly did hold the ability to contradict the glossy public narrative, with memories of candid confessions and intimate details that Meghan could not afford to see unearthed. In a world where image is everything, perception is survival, and destruction comes the moment perception slips. Meghan understood this better than anyone. She was not merely sidestepping scandal. She was proactively eliminating a threat before it could strike. And here lies the nuance. This was never only about embarrassing stories from the past. It was about something larger: ambition, opportunity, and survival at the highest level. Meghan had played the Hollywood game with shrewd skill, but royalty required an entirely new form of image management. Every word had to be measured, every association carefully vetted, every friendship examined for risk. Jessica's closeness, her insight, her ability to speak openly about Meghan's past life, it was no longer an asset, it was a liability, a risk Meghan could not and would not tolerate. And so the severance was carried out with precision. There was no loud confrontation, no explosive statement for the press to devour. Instead, Meghan chose quiet elimination, a silent rewriting of the social script. Invitations that once arrived like clockwork simply stopped. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. Online interactions, likes, comments, photographs together faded until they vanished altogether. To the casual observer, the shift was invisible. Jessica Mulroney's absence seemed like nothing more than a natural drift, a footnote that most of the world never even noticed. But for those who truly understood the bond these two women once shared, the meaning was unmistakable. Jessica had been erased from the story. And here lies the emotional centre of the fallout. Jessica was not just losing a friend. She was losing a role that had given her significance in shaping history. Every ounce of energy she had poured into Meghan, every introduction she had arranged, every quiet tip and subtle adjustment she had provided to elevate Meghan's presence, all of it was cast aside as if it had never mattered. For Meghan, the decision was survival. For Jessica, it was betrayal of the deepest kind. The consequences were stark. Meghan had not only cut ties, she had in essence rewritten history by removing Jessica from the narrative. She distanced herself from the context in which countless truths had been shared, truths that no longer fit the version of herself she needed the world to believe in. By excising Jessica from her circle, she controlled the story, and by controlling the story, she shaped the perception of reality. It is a strategy as old as power itself. Whoever controls the narrative controls the legacy. But such strategies do not come without cost. Severed friendships leave scars. Trust is eroded. Bonds once thought unbreakable turn into quiet wounds. And even if the world never witnesses it, the psychological toll is very real. For Jessica, the outrage, the grief, and the helpless frustration all burned beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Meghan continued forward, maintaining her composed, untouchable, public face, calm, radiant, unassailable. Now pause and consider this. When someone holds secrets powerful enough to destroy you, the temptation to cut them off, to eliminate their presence, becomes overwhelming. But what does that say about loyalty, about morality, about the fragile bonds that define human relationships? Meghan's decision may have been a masterstroke of strategy, but it also revealed the brutal calculation of survival at the top. Sometimes to endure, you must sacrifice not your enemies, but your allies. And yet, the story does not end there. Even after the severance, Jessica's knowledge did not evaporate. Distance did not erase memory. Those secrets lingered in the shadows, hovering in quiet conversations, hidden in reflections, waiting at the crossroads of loyalty and fear. Meghan's decisive move bought her time, but it could not erase history. The past remained alive, waiting an ever-present threat. This is where the tension becomes almost unbearable. The very knowledge that forced Meghan to cut ties still existed, still posed a silent danger. And so we are left with the pressing cliffhanger. What exactly did Jessica hold in her possession that frightened Meghan so profoundly? Was it a story from her Hollywood days, a personal confession whispered in trust, or a collection of moments that, if pieced together, could unravel entirely the image of the compassionate modern royal Meghan? In the next chapter, we will step behind the curtain and reveal the precise secrets, the private moments, and the hidden dynamics that made Jessica both indispensable and dangerous. We will see why Meghan's cold decision was not simply personal, but part of a broader strategy to protect her most valuable creation, her identity. So what could Jessica Mulroney have known that posed such a potent threat to Meghan Markle? The answer is not rooted in scandal alone, but in a series of private truths, carefully chosen strategies, and past decisions that, if illuminated, could completely rewrite the public version of Meghan's life. To grasp the gravity of this, we must return to the beginning, to a time before the royal wedding, before the frenzied media storm, before the world stage. Meghan then was simply a working actress, ambitious, relentless, and intensely aware that perception could make or break her future. In Hollywood, every glance, every whispered comment, every fleeting introduction carried weight. In such a world, nothing was meaningless, and that is precisely where Jessica Mulroney came into the picture. She was not only a friend, she was a gatekeeper. She had the kind of access that few others could claim direct access to Meghan's private world, the raw, unpolished version of herself that the public would never see. Jessica knew of the past relationships Meghan had deliberately erased from interviews and public accounts. These were not harmless teenage crushes or passing romances. They were layered, complex, formative relationships that shaped how Meghan viewed love, ambition, and trust. Some of them ended in painful ways, leaving scars and vulnerabilities that lingered long after. To anyone else, they might have been stories of a young woman learning her way. But to Jessica, with her privileged insight, they were more than stories. They were leverage. Jessica also understood Meghan's drive better than almost anyone. Meghan was never just chasing a paycheck. She was constructing a path, a deliberate trajectory toward influence and recognition. From the glitzy sets of Hollywood to carefully chosen humanitarian appearances, from guest spots on television to aligning herself with select brand partnerships, every move was calculated. Jessica had been there to witness it all, sometimes as a silent observer, other times as a silent partner. She helped shape the narrative, while simultaneously watching the ambition that propelled Meghan's private life ambition that was as sharp as glass. Now, think about it carefully. Who else but a close friend could hold the moments you would most want forgotten? Every confession uttered in late-night vulnerability, every doubt whispered after a failed audition, every misstep in a romantic relationship that you wished could be buried forever, Jessica knew them all. And with knowledge comes power. Power to influence perception, power to shape narrative, and power that could devastate if ever mishandled. So, when Jessica's own standing in the public sphere began to crumble, Meghan recognised the danger instantly. This was no longer a matter of friendship or loyalty. It was survival. If Jessica, by choice or by accident, decided to speak, she could expose contradictions and inconsistencies that clashed violently with the image Meghan had worked for years to perfect. It was a gamble Meghan could not afford, and so she acted with precision. The distancing started in whispers almost invisible at first. Public appearances together dwindled. Social media connections faded away. Invitations that had once been routine stopped arriving. There was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation. It was clean, surgical, carefully executed to remove Jessica from Meghan's immediate orbit without sending up red flags. Meghan was safeguarding her story, ensuring the narrative she wanted the world to believe remained intact. Severing ties was not cruelty, it was efficiency. And yet, here lies the irony. Knowledge does not evaporate simply because the friendship ends. Secrets do not dissolve with silence. Jessica still carried those memories, those truths, and they lingered like shadows that could at any moment stretch back into the light. Meghan had succeeded in removing Jessica from the public stage, but she could not erase what Jessica knew. That knowledge sat in the background like a ticking clock, creating a constant tension that weighed heavily on Meghan's otherwise carefully controlled life. Tom Bower's relentless reporting confirmed that these secrets were far from trivial. They were not isolated anecdotes. They reflected aspects of Meghan's personality behaviours and deliberate choices that, when woven together, painted a portrait that could rival and even destroy the image of a compassionate, progressive, modern royal. A comment here, a strategy there. On their own, they might seem harmless. But together, they formed a dangerous counter-narrative, one that threatened to unravel the story Meghan had so skillfully constructed. Now, think about the stakes. Meghan's role as a Duchess was never only about fame. It was about wielding influence, commanding credibility, and leaving behind a legacy. A single damaging revelation could undermine everything she and her advisors had so painstakingly built. Every step she took, every calculated move she made was about protecting that narrative. And from this perspective, her decision to cut ties with Jessica was not rooted in malice. It was not even personal cruelty. It was pure strategy. In Hollywood, every glance held significance. Every casual comment carried weight, and every single connection had the potential to change a career. In that unforgiving landscape, Jessica Mulroney was not just another companion. She was a gatekeeper. She had access to Meghan's private world, the side of her personality, stripped of polish, the version of herself carefully hidden away from public view. Jessica knew about Meghan's past relationships, the ones deliberately excluded from glossy interviews and magazine profiles. These were not harmless schoolyard crushes or fleeting romances. They were layered, complicated experiences that shaped the way Meghan approached love, ambition, and trust. Some of those relationships ended painfully, leaving scars that marked moments of weakness and vulnerability. To anyone else, they may have been forgotten episodes of youth, but to Jessica, armed with intimate knowledge, they were more than stories. They were leverage. Jessica also understood Meghan's ambition with a clarity that very few possessed. Meghan was never simply collecting paychecks from her acting jobs. She was charting a path, a carefully designed trajectory. Every choice she made was part of a bigger plan, moving from Hollywood roles to humanitarian causes, from appearances on television to securing lucrative brand partnerships. None of it was accidental. Jessica had been there through it all, sometimes watching silently, sometimes actively assisting. She helped guide Meghan's public image, while at the same time witnessing firsthand the relentless ambition that drove her private life. Now, reflect on this. Who better than a close friend could hold the very moments you most wish to erase? Every private confession made in confidence, every professional doubt whispered late at night, every painful misstep in personal relationships Jessica knew. It them all. And with that kind of knowledge came extraordinary power. Power to influence perception, power to control narrative, power that could prove devastating if ever used carelessly. So when Jessica's own public standing began to fracture, Meghan sensed danger immediately. This was no longer about friendship or loyalty. It was about survival. If Jessica whether deliberately or unintentionally chose to speak, she could expose contradictions, inconsistencies, and decisions that did not align with the image Meghan had so carefully crafted over the years. It was a risk Meghan could not take, and so she acted with cold precision. The distancing began almost invisibly. Their public interactions became rare. Social media exchanges faded until they disappeared altogether. Invitations that once flowed freely stopped arriving. There was no loud quarrel, no dramatic falling out. The separation was subtle, surgical, deliberately engineered to extract Jessica from Meghan's orbit, without attracting attention to the fracture. Meghan was protecting her story, guarding the narrative she wanted the world to believe. Cutting ties was not just efficient, it was necessary. But here lies the irony. Knowledge does not simply vanish. Secrets do not dissolve just because one person chooses silence. Jessica still carried those memories, those truths etched into her mind, like shadows waiting for the right moment to resurface. Meghan had succeeded in pushing Jessica from the spotlight, but she could never erase what Jessica already knew. That lingering threat, the constant possibility of exposure, added a heavy psychological burden to Meghan's otherwise controlled existence. Tom Bower's meticulous reporting makes it clear that these secrets were far from insignificant. They were not trivial details. They reflected elements of Meghan's character, past actions, and calculated decisions that, when considered separately, might seem inconsequential. But when compiled, they formed a narrative sharp enough to pierce the polished image of the compassionate, progressive, modern royal she had worked so hard to construct. It was this alternate portrait, hidden but real, that threatened to undo the story Meghan had built for the world. Now, let us pause and weigh the stakes. Meghan's role as a Duchess was never merely about celebrity. It was about wielding influence, building credibility, and crafting a legacy that would endure. A single revelation, just one, could dismantle the narrative she and her advisors had painstakingly constructed. Every move she made, every public step, every private calculation was in service of preserving that story. Seen through that lens, cutting ties with Jessica was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival, a strategy executed with precision. For Jessica, the rupture must have landed like a cascade of disbelief, hurt, and confusion. Imagine pouring years into a friendship, investing your time, your energy, your loyalty, only to watch it dissolve without explanation. No fiery argument, no dramatic confrontation, only the slow, cold disappearance of someone who had once been a constant presence in your life. That is the sharpest cut of all, not a public scandal that burns hot and fast, but the private erasure that leaves silence where intimacy once thrived. Meghan's calculation, however, was never just about emotion. It was about narrative control. Jessica had stumbled into her own controversies, her reputation fraying under public scrutiny. For Meghan, association with Jessica risked contamination, casting shadows over her carefully cultivated image. Worse still, Jessica carried within her vaults of knowledge stories of Meghan's past relationships, private doubts, and the manoeuvres she used to climb the Hollywood ladder. Any one of those threads could unravel the portrait of a compassionate modern royal. To eliminate the threat, Meghan required distance. And yet, here lies the paradox. Cutting Jessica out did not erase the danger. The secret still existed, etched in memory, tucked away in correspondence, lingering in conversations that could one day resurface. Jessica still knew. And knowledge once shared can never truly be recalled. Meghan had delayed the threat, but she had not destroyed it. The fallout rippled on more than one level. It was not only emotional, it was deeply psychological. Trust had fractured on Meghan's side because she could not risk exposure, and on Jessica's because she had been discarded despite her loyalty. Meghan had severed ties with a woman who had been instrumental in shaping her ascent from Hollywood actress to global figure. Jessica, in turn, lost more than a confidant. She lost an ally, a partner in ambition, and the validation of her role in history. Meanwhile, the public saw only smooth continuity, a Duchess untouched by turmoil, her image pristine. The truth, however, was layered with mess, tension, and unspoken betrayal. Tom Bowers' reporting underscores just how high the stakes were. His investigations revealed that Jessica's knowledge was not casual or insignificant. It was comprehensive, intimate, dangerous. She knew details that, if ever laid bare, could fracture Meghan's carefully assembled facade. Relationships, insecurities, raw confessions, all of it could be reassembled into a version of Meghan the world was never meant to see. Timing, too, was critical. Jessica's own controversies provided Meghan with the perfect opening. The moment Jessica's public image faltered, Meghan moved decisively. Her distancing was not reactionary. It was preemptive, executed before Jessica could attempt to reclaim her voice, or before the media could speculate and connect the dots. In matters of power, timing is everything, and Meghan understood this. Acting first meant retaining control. Still, even strategy comes with cost. Behind every carefully managed move, there is a human toll. Jessica's sense of betrayal, grief, and indignation must have been overwhelming. Years of laughter, late-night calls, shared celebrations, and whispered confidences did not vanish with an unfollow or an unanswered phone call. They lingered like ghosts, haunting both women in different ways. The memories remained a constant reminder of what was built and what was lost. The question for you, the audience, is straightforward but unsettling. If someone you trusted completely held knowledge that could alter the very course of your life, how far would you go to protect yourself? Would you act with the same cold precision that Meghan did, severing ties without hesitation, or would you cling to loyalty even at the risk of exposure? Jessica's isolation wasn't the end of the story. It was the catalyst. A rupture at this level never stays contained. The consequences ripple outward. Mutual friends begin to sense the strain. The media always attuned to shifts in tone, and silence starts to notice the absence. Public perception bends sometimes subtly, sometimes sharply. Meghan's inner circle contracts, leaving only those whose loyalty is beyond question, whose silence is absolute, whose allegiance aligns perfectly with her survival. Here is where the psychological dimension cuts deepest. For Meghan, cutting Jessica free was not just about ending a friendship. It was about tightening control over narrative perception and reputation. Every public move became part of this strategy. Each charity appearance, each carefully staged moment with Harry, each curated glimpse of domestic life with the royal family, all reinforced the version of herself she needed the world to see. It was storytelling, not happenstance. But beneath the polish, a constant tension remained. Control has limits. Knowledge once shared cannot be erased. Jessica still carried pieces of Meghan's past, the confidences, the doubts, the private admissions. These fragments were a latent threat, a ticking clock that demanded vigilance. One careless word, one whispered leak, one reckless remark could unravel years of careful image building. The risk wasn't hypothetical, it was ever present. And so we arrive at the cliffhanger. Meghan's decision to sever ties may have been ruthless strategy, but it did not eliminate the danger. Jessica still knew too much. The question lingers like a shadow. Would those secrets stay buried, or would they someday surface, reshaping the story the world believes about Meghan Markle? In the next section, we turn to the fallout, the widening ripples that spread from this private fracture into the public sphere. Because even though Meghan moved with precision to create distance, whispers never stay whispers for long. In the world of high-profile women, even silence can become scandal. The quiet rupture between Meghan Markle and Jessica Mulroney did not remain hidden. Though Meghan had acted deliberately carefully, the aftershocks spread. The echoes reached their mutual friends, their professional circles, and inevitably the media. And in a culture obsessed with stories of betrayal and ambition, whispers have a habit of hardening into headlines, especially when secrets sit beneath the surface. This is the nature of subtle power. What looks like a personal choice, a pause in invitations, a silence on social media, a string of unanswered messages can spiral into something larger. Patterns emerged. Friends noticed Meghan's absence from gatherings where her presence had once been certain. Public appearances with Jessica dwindled until they vanished altogether. Mentions once casual and warm were gone from interviews and posts. The silence became a symbol. And in the world of the powerful silence, often speaks louder than words. For Jessica, the experience was profoundly destabilising. She had poured years of emotional labour, loyalty, and practical support into Meghan's ascent. Every introduction she arranged, every professional opportunity she facilitated, every late-night conversation and stylistic suggestion had played a role in constructing the public image Meghan came to embody. And yet, with a single calculated move, all of that was wiped away. It was as though the history of their friendship had been rewritten without her consent, leaving her erased from the narrative she had helped shape. The sting was sharpened by timing. Jessica's own reputation was faltering, her public standing slipping under scrutiny. Meghan's calculated retreat coincided precisely with this period of weakness. For Jessica, it meant that just as she needed support, she found herself abandoned. For Meghan, the overlap was intolerable, because Jessica's visibility, paired with her knowledge, created a volatile mix. A single casual remark, one slip in judgment, or even an innocent comment could be weaponised by a hungry media eager for scandal. Meghan's decision to sever ties wasn't only a strategy, it was survival. Yet in her attempt to seize control, Meghan created new complications. Friends who had once been at ease in their shared circles suddenly found themselves walking on eggshells, forced to navigate subtle but unmistakable shifts. Conversations became less candid, more calculated. Mutual acquaintances, once connectors between the two women, now found themselves players in a quiet but dangerous game of loyalty and discretion. The fracture didn't simply exile Jessica. It reshaped the entire social landscape around Meghan, making clear that closeness to her carried conditions, boundaries, and silent risks. The media, ever alert to even the faintest tremor in celebrity circles, began picking up on signs. Followers noticed missing photographs, reduced interactions, the quiet deletion of affectionate mentions. Entertainment outlets speculated about disagreements and hidden conflict. No official statement was given, yet the absence itself became the story. The narrative of a fallout between Meghan and Jessica, once inseparable, took root in the public imagination, fueled by silence that was louder than words. At the heart of it all lay the psychology of power. Meghan's move was not an act of impulse. It was grounded in her acute awareness that, in her world, information is currency, and loyalty is never absolute. The smallest leak could destabilise the image she had worked so hard to cultivate, that of a compassionate, progressive modern royal. By acting preemptively, cutting ties swiftly and decisively, she reinforced a message to everyone inside and outside her circle. Control your narrative, or it will control you. Still, the emotional toll was undeniable. For Jessica, this was more than the loss of a cherished friendship. It was the loss of influence, credibility, and a shared identity forged over years of closeness. The betrayal must have burned all the more deeply because the outside world barely noticed. To the public eye, nothing had changed. Behind closed doors, however, Jessica was left with a wound that was both personal and professional, festering quietly in the shadow of Meghan's seamless image. This divide between public perception and private reality became a study in modern image management. Meghan had safeguarded her brand, but in doing so, she fostered speculation, unease, and lingering questions. To casual observers, The distancing could be dismissed as coincidence or natural drift. But the truth was colder. Every missed call, every vanished photograph, every omission was a deliberate step in preserving her control over the narrative. And yet, for all the precision of her actions, one reality could not be erased. Secrets are stubborn. Jessica still knew. She held the private confessions, the whispered doubts, the unfiltered insights into Meghan's past relationships and professional strategies, the very contradictions that undermined the perfect public image. That knowledge remained in the background silent, but powerful, a reminder that even the most carefully orchestrated severance cannot eliminate risk. Here's the pressing question for you, the audience. When someone you trust holds details about your life that could compromise your reputation, how far would you go to shield yourself? Would you confront them directly, try to negotiate a truce? Or would you quietly withdraw as Meghan did, severing ties without open conflict? And more importantly, what would that decision cost both sides? The slow but deliberate isolation of Jessica sent ripples through Meghan's inner circle. Friends and allies became more careful, more measured, acutely aware that closeness to Meghan came with unspoken rules. Loyalty must be absolute discretion, non-negotiable, and alignment with her chosen narrative essential. It created an atmosphere of controlled intimacy, where friendships were maintained only if they reinforced the image Meghan needed the world to see. Any sign of unpredictability, any deviation from the script, risked exclusion, loss of access, and permanent mistrust. Timing magnified everything. Both Meghan and Jessica were under public and media scrutiny, their every move analysed by tabloids and bloggers. A single misstep could be inflated into global scandal. Meghan's calculated decision to distance herself minimised this danger, removing Jessica from her orbit before even the smallest slip could be used against her. It was preemptive containment, designed to eliminate risk before it could grow. And yet, a deeper truth lingered. Knowledge cannot be destroyed simply because a friendship ends. Secrets remain stored in memory waiting. Sometimes they surface in moments of anger or desperation. Other times they emerge slowly through whispers and insinuations. Meghan's decisive move reduced immediate danger, but it did not erase the threat. The clock continued to tick. The risk remained alive. So here lies the cliffhanger. Meghan's distancing from Jessica was methodical, deliberate, and undeniably protective, but it never neutralised the power Jessica still held. Those secrets, individually minor but collectively potent, remained an unspoken danger. And the question that shadows this entire saga is simple yet chilling. Would those truths stay buried forever, or was their revelation inevitable? In the next section, we turn to the heart of the matter, the secrets themselves. What exactly did Jessica Mulroney know that forced Meghan Markle to sacrifice such a valuable friendship to answer? We must revisit Meghan's past, the Hollywood ecosystem she navigated, the ambitions she pursued, and the vulnerabilities she guarded fiercely from public eyes. Begin with Meghan's romantic history. While the public story begins and ends with Prince Harry, Jessica knew far more. She had been privy to Meghan's earlier relationships, the boyfriends, the breakups, the moments of vulnerability, and the choices driven as much by ambition as by affection. These were not trivial footnotes. They revealed how Meghan balanced love with strategy, how she weighed loyalty against opportunity, how she sometimes chose advancement over permanence. A single revelation from this hidden history could have redrawn Meghan's image not as a compassionate modern royal, but as a calculating figure willing to shed connections the moment they ceased to serve her assent. Jessica also had rare insight into Meghan's career ambitions in Hollywood. She had watched closely as Meghan carved her path, moving with deliberate precision from bit parts and supporting roles to her breakout as a lead in Suits. These were not random opportunities falling into her lap. They were carefully cultivated. Meghan built networks, positioned herself strategically, and manoeuvred in ways that revealed not just ambition, but a shrewd, sometimes ruthless determination to advance. To the casual observer, it might have looked like hard work and good fortune. But to someone like Jessica, who saw the backstage reality, it was evidence of a woman who could bend situations in her favour with remarkable calculation. Beyond the career strategy, Jessica also knew about the private doubts Meghan carried moments of insecurity that stood in stark contrast to the poised, confident public image she projected. These were the confessions that revealed hesitation, fear, and internal conflict about relationships, identity, and career choices. If exposed, such admissions could fracture the seamless narrative of a flawless rise, creating contradictions that challenge the image of Meghan as a naturally radiant figure destined for royal prominence. Jessica had also borne witness to Meghan's interactions with family, friends, and colleagues in ways the outside world never could. She had seen the quiet tensions, the strategic silences, and the deliberate choices to distance herself from people when it suited her broader ambitions. These observations painted a more pragmatic, at times, ruthless portrait of Meghan, someone willing to reshape her inner circle whenever her image demanded it. In short, Jessica carried the blueprint for dismantling the Meghan Markle narrative from within. And here lies the crux: these were not abstract possibilities, they were real. Jessica did not need to invent or embellish, she simply had to remember. Her knowledge alone, memories, observations, and confidences was enough to serve as leverage, a weapon in the wrong hands. Meghan's decision to cut her out was not paranoia, it was preemptive damage control. In the volatile intersection of fame, media, obsession, and royal scrutiny, having someone so close who knew so much was a danger too great to ignore. Yet we must pause to consider the emotional weight of this choice. Jessica wasn't just a liability. She had once been a trusted confidant, a companion who had laughed, celebrated, and grieved alongside Meghan. Severing her wasn't just a strategy, it was betrayal of the most intimate kind. To erase someone who knows you that deeply is to cut away part of your own history. And yet, for Meghan, the calculation was simple sentimentality could not outweigh survival. The fallout carried both subtle and dramatic dimensions. Outwardly, Meghan never wavered. She continued her royal duties, philanthropic engagements, and carefully staged public appearances without betraying any sign of turmoil. But within the private sphere, the rupture sent shockwaves. Mutual acquaintances were suddenly navigating a tense new reality. Being close to Meghan now required total discretion. Any slip, any misunderstood remark could carry consequences. Timing also played a decisive role. Jessica's own controversies had already drawn media scrutiny, magnifying the risks her proximity posed. Meghan's decision was not a knee-jerk reaction, it was strategically timed. She acted first, creating distance before Jessica's knowledge could overlap with public narratives in a way that would harm her. It was ruthless but effective damage limitation. And still, even after the separation, the unease lingered. Information doesn't evaporate simply because access is cut off. Jessica remained in possession of intimate knowledge, details of Meghan's actions, her ambitions, her insecurities that could one day resurface. Whether through whispers, memoirs, or indiscreet conversation, the risk endured. Meghan's decision had bought her time, but it could never erase the danger entirely. So, here's the question for you, the audience. What would you do if someone you once trusted to completely knew enough about you to dismantle the very story of your life? Would you attempt reconciliation, try to negotiate boundaries, or like Meghan, would you act decisively to neutralise the threat before it could surface? The way one answers this doesn't just reveal strategy, it uncovers character priorities and the true limits of loyalty. And that brings us to the cliffhanger. Now that we understand the weight of the secrets Jessica carried, the next chapter turns toward the fallout. How did Jessica respond to being cut off so abruptly? How did their shared friends navigate the sudden fracture? And perhaps most importantly, what lasting mark did this rupture leave on Meghan, both in her reputation as a friend and in her standing as a global figure under constant scrutiny? The aftermath of Meghan Markle's decision to distance herself from Jessica Mulroney was a layered drama unfolding in private whispers and public silences at the same time. On the surface, it appeared subtle, almost seamless. A quiet reshuffling of relationships. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. Social media interactions dissolved into nothing. To casual observers, it looked like little more than the natural drift of two busy women. But beneath that calm facade was a storm of emotion, calculation, and consequence. For Jessica, the blow was immediate and deeply personal. Years of shared experiences, moments of guidance, laughter, and intimate confessions were suddenly invalidated. To realise that someone she had defended, styled, and supported now regarded her presence as a liability must have been devastating. The betrayal wasn't theoretical, it was tangible, and it cut to the core. Jessica hadn't merely lost a friend, she had lost the role of co-architect in Meghan's transformation from actress to royal figure. To be cast aside without explanation was not just rejection, it was an erasure of her own influence and identity. Yet Jessica chose silence, or perhaps silence chose her. In circles where reputations are scrutinised globally, direct confrontation is rarely an option. To speak out publicly would have invited a firestorm, exposing both women to damaging headlines and endless speculation. A single accusatory remark could have spun into weeks of scandal. Jessica therefore treaded carefully, navigating the rupture with restraint, even as she endured the private sting of betrayal. Meanwhile, Meghan recalibrated. Her inner circle grew smaller but tighter, bound by unspoken conditions, loyalty above all discretion at any cost, and absolute alignment with her narrative. Access to Meghan was no longer casual, it was conditional. One misplaced word, one ill-timed social post, one careless remark could be interpreted as a breach. Friendships became carefully managed alliances, their survival dependent on obedience to the narrative Meghan had worked so hard to construct. The media, as always, sensed the shift. Absences were noted, interactions were measured, and missing appearances became fodder for speculation. Entertainment blogs and tabloids dissected timelines and social feeds, stringing together fragments into a storyline of conflict and distance. Readers devoured the pieces, piecing them together into an unfinished puzzle. The public, without realising it, became participants in a drama that unfolded largely behind closed doors. The fracture between Meghan and Jessica had become more than a private rift. It was a quiet narrative, one of loyalty, betrayal, and survival, that shaped perceptions not just of their friendship, but of Meghan's ability to manage control and protect her identity in a world where silence can roar louder than words. Psychologically, the rupture carried weight that neither woman could easily shake. For Meghan, the act of distancing was a shield, a deliberate move to protect her, past her vulnerabilities and the carefully constructed image she had fought to maintain. For Jessica, the impact was more visceral. To be erased without confrontation, without explanation, without the dignity of closure, left her with a gnawing sense of betrayal, injustice, and profound loss. Timing, too, was everything. Meghan's move coincided with Jessica's own season of public scrutiny, a moment when Jessica's reputation was fragile and the risk of association high. By acting decisively during this window, Meghan minimised exposure, contained potential leaks, and ensured that the narrative remained firmly under her control. Any hesitation might have allowed speculation to spiral beyond her reach. And yet, even after the clean cut, the tension lingered like a shadow. Knowledge does not vanish when ties are severed. Secrets endure in memory, in private conversations, in the unspoken power of what someone knows. Jessica's awareness of Meghan's past was a constant silent threat. Meghan's strategy bought her time, yes, but it could never fully erase the possibility of revelation. The danger was not eliminated, it was merely deferred. The story also reveals a larger truth about power, loyalty, and the fragility of friendship in high-stakes environments. The higher one rises, the thinner the fabric of trust becomes. Bonds that appear genuine are inevitably tested by strategy, risk, and survival. The knowledge others hold about you confers power, and with that power comes danger. Meghan's decision illustrates this uncomfortable balance between personal loyalty and self-preservation, between emotion and calculation, between intimacy and survival. From a social perspective, the ripple effects were immediate. Mutual friends were thrust into awkward positions, forced to adjust their loyalties and recalibrate their conversations. What had once been candid became cautious. The message was unmistakable. Proximity to Meghan required vigilance, and relationships would now be measured against the risk they posed to her public persona. And yet, for all the careful manoeuvring, the human element could not be erased. Feelings of hurt, grief, and confusion inevitably surfaced. For Jessica, the loss was staggering, both personal and professional. For Meghan, the cost was vigilance without rest, a constant awareness that perception had to be controlled, secrets contained, and appearances maintained. At the intersection of private bonds and public scrutiny, the stakes were no less than identity, reputation, and survival. Here lies the cliffhanger. While the public saw a polished Meghan smiling through royal duties and philanthropic appearances, the private truth was far more tense. Behind the facade was a woman engaged in constant calculation, perpetually aware that Jessica's knowledge lingered as a threat. The fracture was not merely a moment of the past. It was a live, ongoing tension with repercussions that could resurface at any time. In the next section, we will dive deeper into the implications of this fallout, how it reshaped Meghan's view of trust, redefined her inner circle, and laid the groundwork for later controversies that blurred the line between her private battles and her public persona. Because the rupture between Meghan Markle and Jessica Mulroney was more than the dissolution of a friendship, it was a turning point that fundamentally changed Meghan's approach to relationships. From that moment on, friendships were no longer rooted solely in emotional connection. They became transactions, each bond assessed for loyalty, discretion, and alignment with the narrative Meghan needed to uphold. Think about it. In the world of high-profile figures, particularly someone navigating the leap from Hollywood actress to royal duchess, trust is a currency more valuable than money. Every exchange, every shared moment, every whispered confession carries weight. A single detail, if placed in the wrong hands, can become leverage or exposure. Meghan understood this with piercing clarity. Jessica's knowledge wasn't casual, it was comprehensive. Hollywood, history, intimate relationships, late-night doubts, candid insecurities, all of it lived in Jessica's memory. Cutting her out wasn't only about self-protection. It was a calculated message, both to the public and to Meghan's inner circle. Loyalty has limits, and discretion is non-negotiable. From a psychological standpoint, the rupture left deep consequences. For Meghan, it forged a sharper vigilance, an almost clinical awareness of human behaviour and its potential risks. She developed a heightened sensitivity to the asymmetry of information, the simple truth that the closer someone is to you, the more power they carry to harm you if trust falters. This realization became a guiding principle in her future alliances and interactions. Meghan grew increasingly selective, choosing relationships that reinforced her carefully constructed narrative and eliminating those that posed even a whisper of jeopardy. Jessica's response, or more accurately, her restraint, told another story. By refraining from public confrontation, she avoided feeding the frenzy, protecting what fragments of her reputation remained. Yet silence carried its own weight. The pain of being erased quietly, without confrontation, without answers, carved deep emotional scars. It was not just the loss of a friend, it was the erasure of a role she had played in shaping Meghan's trajectory. Gone was the influence, the intimacy, the shared identity built over years. What lingered was a hollow sense of injustice, resentment, and unresolved grief. The ripple effects extended into their wider circle. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances quickly absorbed the unspoken rules. To remain close to Meghan meant more than affection, it required calculation. Every word, every comment, every gesture was scrutinised against potential consequences. Relationships became transactional, measured less by sincerity and more by risk management. Intimacy was no longer free. It was a privilege granted only under the strictest conditions. Timing was the fulcrum of it all. Meghan's move coincided perfectly with Jessica's public controversies, a moment when Jessica's vulnerability magnified the danger she posed. By striking first, Meghan neutralised risk before speculation could escape her control. The rupture wasn't a reaction, it was a preemptive strike, a masterclass in narrative dominance. And yet, even with such precision, one reality remained inescapable. Knowledge does not vanish simply because a friendship ends. Jessica still carried the archive of Meghan's past choices, confessions, contradictions that could, in the right context, redefine how the world perceived her. These details weren't idle curiosities. They were potential disruptors, fragments of truth with the power to puncture a carefully curated image. Meghan's decisive distancing brought her time stability and control, but it could never erase the lingering threat. Secrets once shared never truly disappear. They live on, in memory, in context, and in the possibility of revelation. The implications of this fracture stretched far beyond private bonds and into the arena of public perception. Outwardly, Meghan projected composure, polished appearances, curated messaging, and an image untouched by conflict. Yet behind that facade, the tension shaped her decisions in subtle but decisive ways. It influenced whom she trusted, what she shared, and how carefully she crafted the narrative she presented to the world. Friendships were no longer organic connections, they became transactions. Alliances were weighed and measured, not for intimacy, but for reliability and loyalty. Every interaction was filtered through the lens of both personal and reputational risk. Here's the reflection for you, the audience. When someone holds knowledge that could redefine how the world perceives you, choices narrow quickly. Do you distance yourself, silence them, or attempt control? It stops being a matter of friendship and becomes one of survival. Meghan's decision to sever ties with Jessica exemplifies the brutal intersection where loyalty, intimacy, and power collide. Emotional bonds, no matter how deep, are fragile when identity, legacy, and public image are at stake. And now comes the cliffhanger. While we understand how Meghan's decision reshaped her approach to trust and her inner circle, the next chapter moves into the fallout. How whispers spread into headlines, how the rupture echoed through celebrity circles, and how it reshaped Meghan's public and private identity in the years that followed. This is not only a story of strategic manoeuvring, it is also one of emotional consequence, of human cost, and of the enduring shadow cast by secrets that refuse to disappear. So what happens when whispers grow loud enough to become headlines, when the quiet fracture of a friendship once confined to private spaces spills into the public domain? That was the dangerous position Meghan Markle and Jessica Mulroney faced after their rupture. It wasn't merely two women drifting apart, it was about optics perception and control of narrative. The media didn't need verified facts, it fed on fragments, on silences, on absences. It pieced them together, spun speculation into stories, and served them to an eager audience. And in Meghan's case, the appetite was insatiable. Here's the central question. How do you manage the gaze of a world already suspicious, already critical, already searching for cracks in the facade you've spent years constructing? Meghan's fallout with Jessica unfolded under exactly that gaze. The first clues were quiet, almost imperceptible. Jessica's absence became conspicuous. No more joint outings, no cheerful comments on social media, no casual name drops in interviews. For two women, once portrayed as inseparable, the silence was deafening, and the press, as always, pounced. Tabloids churned out speculative pieces. Anonymous insiders whispered of betrayal and tension. Jessica's own controversies were revived and tied to Meghan, fueling the theory that the Duchess's distancing wasn't personal at all, but pure survival strategy. And just like that, Meghan was recast once more. Not the loyal friend, but the calculating figure willing to cut ties the moment they became inconvenient. Was this reality, or was it merely the media shaping the story it wanted to tell? Here's the contradiction. Privately, Meghan may have been acting to protect herself, eliminating a potential liability before it could harm her. Yet, publicly, the very move designed to safeguard her image fueled the opposite perception. She appeared cold. She appeared transactional. She appeared ruthless. The narrative she fought to control had slipped through her hands, rewritten by outsiders. Jessica, meanwhile, became a silent shadow in this unfolding drama. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't publish a tell-all. She didn't wield the knowledge she possessed like a weapon. Instead, she receded into the background, allowing speculation to swirl around her absence, while the world debated what she might say if she ever chose to speak.